Hello, I'm Askar Sherliyev. Welcome to the news from Kazakhstan, and here are the headlines. Karaganda disabled miners are in litigation with its trade union. They accuse the organization of abusing the rights of workers. Senator Gani Kasimov offers secret services to stop purchasing unreliable aircrafts produced in CIS due to their high rate of accidents. $10 billion for anti-crisis purposes were invested to the banking sector. Minister of Economy commented on the disappearance of assets from the National Fund. The trade union infringes the rights of workers. On Thursday, the Karaganda Regional Court examined the civil petition of the disabled miner against the trade union of miners, Korgao. The miner, with 28 years of experience, lost his job without any compensation. More details in the next report.
Vasily Kolomitsov, a miner with 28 years of employment history, has a bone to pick with the labor union. The disabled worker had been paying a certain amount from his salary to the labor union all these years, and now he cannot get a due compensation. In 2005, he ended up in a group of around 2,000 other miners who were recognized disabled due to an occupational disease. In 2011, the management of the company ruled them unfit for mining works and dismissed without prior notice and due benefits. We didn't get a single penny from 2005 to 2010. There are 3,000 miners like me, and we are completely left out. 500 other miners are getting material compensations, although we did not work any less than they did, but we are not getting our payments. In 2012, the miner filed a lawsuit against the labor union. At the time, the court awarded him a compensation in the amount of $5,300 instead of the due $13,000. The miner thought the labor union violated his rights and appealed against the decision. On Thursday, the first hearing on the case was held in Karaganda Regional Court. The employer thought the compensation was enough, and the labor union was of the opinion the employee had no right for the compensation at all. At the same time, the court's decision does not give us the name of the law that would not allow paying a one-time compensation to Kolomitsov. In the meantime, representatives of the miners' labor union, Korgao, are not ready to enter into a legal argument with disabled miners. They say they were not aware of the lawsuit against the organization. 10 other miners whose health was undermined while working for ArcelorMittal Temirtau have also joined the lawsuit.
New housing will be provided for the residents of collapsing apartment block in Atyrau. As was reported by the head of the region, Bakhtykozha Izmukhambetov, 85 families will receive new apartments instead of their current emergency housing. To recap, a month ago in Atyrau, several apartments collapsed underground in one of the multi-story buildings. 90 families were evacuated to the school and nursing home. All this time, people were waiting for the decision of the expert commission.
By the expert opinion, the building is deemed in emergency condition and no longer fit for further operation. Improper maintenance was named the reason for the collapse of floor slabs in the apartment block on Subdarinskaya Street in Atyrau. It appears that poor conditions of heating networks and sewer lines led to the failure of installed supports. Unauthorized major remodeling of apartments was named another cause of the emergency. At the end of the day, the city administration will provide tenants with new housing distributed based on the size of the family. One-room apartments for families of 3 people and less, and 3-bedroom flats for families with 6 members and more. The news was long awaited by the tenants, as it took well over a month for the local administration to figure out whether evacuated families have the right to the new housing. The authorities, however, did not say exactly when people will see the new housing. I am very grateful to the regional and city administrations for telling us the great news. I work in the public sector as a teacher and was on the waiting list. Now I'll be getting a 2-bedroom apartment in Nursai microdistrict. Thank you very much.
Advisor to the President of Kazakhstan is making surprising statements yet again. An army of 40,000 journalists must be on the forefront of presidential reforms, while the opposition mass media will continue to be under pressure. More on the subject in the next report.
Yet another controversial statement made by the presidential political advisor Yermohamed Yurtizbayev stirred quite a reaction in the media. This time, the ex-minister of information said in an interview he believes reporters should be free of criminal prosecution, but in return, journalists should promote the implementation of the national leader's strategy. Regarding the interaction between the state and mass media, we should be following the experience of 30 developed countries. I do not mean to sound snobbish, but I believe that a 40,000 army of journalists in Kazakhstan must be on the front line promoting the president's strategy, Kazakhstan 2050. Meanwhile, the mission of the state is to provide all necessary conditions for these purposes. In addition to explaining responsibilities of media workers, Yurtizbayev also complained about the poorly developed investigative journalism in the country. Lukman Akhmedyarov, a reporter with Uralskaya Nedelya who survived a brutal assault last April, disagrees with the official, believing the genre is still there, but it's just too risky. If it wasn't for reporters involved in investigative journalism, we would never have learned about the strike of oil workers in Zhanaozen or about the plundered funds allocated for the Asian Games. We would not have learned about many other corruption cases. Even in the godforsaken region of western Kazakhstan, there are plenty of examples where investigative journalism would reveal very important facts for society. Media advocates in Astana also criticized Yertazbayev's message. Instead of improving the situation with freedom of speech, officials are only concerned with persecution of freethinkers, says the head of the legal media center, Diana Akremova. If the freedom of speech situation is perfectly fine in the country, then why do authorities plan to adopt a new penal code, which in fact significantly increases criminal liability for the journalist, wonders the activist. We're talking about new terms of punishment, huge fines not only for defamation but also for the invasion of privacy, infringement on the reputation of officials, and inciting social hatred. It limits the journalist's operation scope, preventing them from writing critical articles. Government officials insist the state has provided conditions for the development of free press, yet about 40 different print and electronic media experienced quite the opposite at the end of 2012, after the authorities declared them illegal through local courts.
Where did $10 billion go? They were invested to the banking sector. On Thursday, Minister of Economy of Kazakhstan said that these anti-crisis assets from the National Fund didn't disappear. Experts wonder whether the recent statement of the president on the loss of the assets is a signal to his entourage, or is it a real default of the current political system? Details follow.
The Kazakh community and government officials are still trying to find out what happened to the $10 billion of the National Fund's budget. Responsible executives seem to be unable to provide a somewhat reasonable answer. On Thursday, the Minister of Economy, Yerbolat Dasaev, attempted to clear up the situation and assure the actual fund owners that the money will be recovered. The money did not just disappear. As you might have heard, President Nursultan Nazarbayev confirmed that the funds were provided on a repayable basis and commissioned us to investigate the matter. The money was invested into the banking sector, which means that selling the state-owned banks will help us recover the assets. All we need to do is wait for the banks to be sold. The rather uncertain response of the government agency head failed to settle concerns of the politician Bolat Abilov, who seems puzzled by the president's passive attitude towards the current egregious situation. The head of state knows that the situation involves some of the senior officials who may well sit next to him during the administration meetings. Otherwise, he would have already engaged the financial police and prosecutor's office to investigate the incident. The People's Communist Party is staggered by the enormous financial loss and know well who must take responsibility for the outrageous case of embezzlement. The misappropriated $10 billion are not the government's personal assets. This money belongs to the people of Kazakhstan. In this particular case, the president must take all the responsibility as the principal state guarantor. Citizens of the country keep coming up with new versions of the disappearance of the crisis bailout funds. Some blame it on the lack of the budget system transparency, while others suspect government officials of the National Fund's misappropriation. Meanwhile, the whereabouts of the missing billions are still unknown.
The decision voiced by the President of Kazakhstan on the merge of assets of all Kazakh pension funds is one of the most discussed issues lately. Currently, it is not yet clear how the mechanism will look like, but there are serious doubts that the consequences will be favorable for the future generations in terms of increasing the efficiency and reliability of the pension system in general.
The new round of pension reforms is in the center of heated discussion yet again. Supporters and opponents of the single non-government pension fund management company are actively debating its pros and cons. The disadvantage is that in the past there were 20 independent funds making their own decisions about investing within the current regulatory restrictions. On the other hand, the system allows saving on wages otherwise paid to 20 companies, but of course in this case there won't be any competition. Economist Piotr Svoik supports the consolidation idea and proposes to spend pension contributions on the development of the electricity sector and improvement of public utilities. The government must match every penny coming from citizens. The investment should be equal with a one-to-one match. The head of Pension Funds Association, Aidar Alibayev, believes the consolidation will bring no significant changes or increase the efficiency of the NPF. After all, the human factor will remain an issue. The integrity of officials who will manage the pension fund is questionable simply because they have shown for years that they are not effective managers. We cannot count on them, especially now when the lack of financial tools will prevent them from showing superior returns. Blogger Kazbek Bisibayev is skeptical about the changes. He relies on his children and grandchildren as the source of his guaranteed pension. In Soviet times, the system was a little different, being based on solidarity so that the employed population literally supported the generation of pensioners. But now we deduct money for pension funds that make an investment, supposedly so that the money would return with a profit. Apparently this didn't work. The new Minister of Labor and Social Protection said that private funds failed to make any money and the state had to step in once again. Basically, it didn't work out. Private pension funds work as joint stock companies in Kazakhstan, so the new single state-run pension fund will have to buy their shares likely through the national bank. At the same time, the Minister of Economy said the entire idea is different. There will be no single fund, and instead a single operating company that will manage all other accounts and investment returns.
The state budget remains the most secretive document for the public. The statement was voiced at a press conference in Astana by the representatives of Sanj Public Fund.
Having studied the data of the International Organization Budget Partnership, the head of Sanj Center, Zhanara Jandosova, came to a conclusion that Kazakhstan's budget remains one of the most classified public documents, despite its transparency index growing from 38 to 48 out of 100 possible points in the last 2 years. Transparency is an absolute necessity if we want to make it effective. It is also not difficult to achieve. Environment specialist Sergei Kuratov is trying to draw public attention to the issues of corruption, state overall capacity, and of course environmental protection. The figures he has are very important, but not everyone will favor their disclosure, he says. Going by the index of the state capacity monitored by Peace Foundation, Kazakhstan is in an unfavorable position due to extremely low public service quality, poor legislation, and high crime rates. Compared to others, Kazakhstan's international standing for last year looks quite modest, say experts. It landed on 176th place out of 197 in the Freedom of Speech Index and 133rd from the possible 176 in corruption. In terms of economic freedom, Kazakhstan was ranked 65th out of 179. The level of democracy placed Kazakhstan among authoritarian regimes. Economist Miruert Makhmutova is often involved in coming up with international economic rankings and says that sometimes local officials simply ignore expert organizations' opinions. For instance, in November 2011, the head of the National Bank, Grigory Marchenko, questioned the data of several analytical agencies which downgraded Kazakhstan's sovereign rating. Internationally comparable indexes is an important source of information to assess each country. International investors usually make a decision after looking at any state's corruption as well as economic freedom indexes. Experts emphasize the necessity for the authorities to refrain from ignoring low ratings as they actually tell the government it's time to improve the situation, rather than undermine the country's international image and reputation.
President of Kazakhstan made a surprising statement urging state officials to start mass construction of educational facilities, not prioritizing the quality. The opinion of the head of state was voiced recently at the briefing discussing the totals of the year.
This is the president of Kazakhstan at the opening ceremony of Balapan Kindergarten in Usk-Kamenogorsk. The national leader personally inspected the gym, the music room, and the pool with a high-tech water treatment system. 2 years later, this kindergarten is again in the spotlight, yet this time it receives criticism. During the discussion of the new State Development Strategy 2050, Nursultan Nazarbayev suggests to focus on quantity rather than quality during the construction of educational institutions. An ordinary kindergarten in Usk-Kamenogorsk indeed looks like a palace. Elsewhere, daycare facilities are simply combined 2- or 3-room apartments where children play on the carpet, eat, sleep, and study all at the same place. In contrast, we build botanical gardens and swimming pools. Why would a kindergarten need a swimming pool? Considering our conditions, it's more likely they'll just fall sick there. The kindergarten in Almaty has no swimming pools but does not look like a simple apartment either. Children learn how to dance here, learn English and computer basics, says the headmaster. The 2-story building that's been here since Soviet times is now a bit tight. People get in line to enroll their children into our kindergarten. On the 1st of every month, we advertise vacancies if we have any. We now have 3 groups, which is about 80 children graduating every month. The admission to the youngest group is announced annually, receiving about 20-25 children. The president suggested solving the problem by letting preschool facilities use state institution buildings. For instance, the former building of the finance ministry in Almaty. That's almost 250,000 square meters, which could be used for children's education. The government and the parliament have moved from Almaty to Astana. What happened to the buildings? I'm asking you, Mr. Zhamishev. Did you even bother to figure out who raided them? Why 240,000 square meters are being leased? Thousands more square meters are taken by various national state enterprises, agencies, and joint stock companies. Oh, just sit down. It's a shame the president asked the finance minister to sit down, as he could have raised hopes of many parents by actually answering the question. According to official data, in Almaty alone, there are 22,000 children waiting in line to enroll into kindergartens.
Senator Gani Kasimov believes that Kazakhstan must refuse from purchasing aircrafts of Soviet past, which are outdated. This equipment is deadly, said Kasimov.
The Senate member made the inquiry following the tragedy near Shymkent. The plane crash in the end of 2012 claimed the lives of 27 military personnel, including the leadership of the National Security Committee's Border Service Agency. Addressing Prime Minister Akhmetov, Gani Kasimov suggested to follow the example of President Nursultan Nazarbayev, who banned purchasing of passenger planes made in the CIS about 10 years ago due to concerns about the safety of civil flights. Instead, Kazakhstan only uses Airbuses and Boeings now. The same should be done in regards to military aviation, since the state can no longer afford putting lives of citizens in danger, said Kasimov. Soviet-era holdovers caused the death of the entire Polish leadership, and in a separate case, a Chelyabinsk hockey team. Yet we want to buy equipment produced in the 90s, which is even worse.
The Dima Yakovlev law is not going to be created in Kazakhstan, even in case of a positive reaction from Washington to the Zhanaozen list compiled similarly to the Magnitsky law. To recap, the Kazakh version of entry-banned state officials list includes hundreds of names, but NGO representatives believe that Kazakhstan will not be able to respond.
It is unclear how the Zhanaozen law will affect Kazakhstan officials should it be adopted. Our authorities might respond similarly to the Russian government, since we have almost identical political regimes, but they also may come up with something different. Bakhajan Tarigozhina is a member of the initiative group that brought the Zhanaozen blacklist to Washington last November. The list itself includes everyone the activists deemed responsible for the tragedy in the Mangistar region. When asked whether Kazakh authorities might respond with a ban for U.S. citizens to adopt local children, as it happened in Russia, the opposition said it was unlikely. Nevertheless, the U.S. also has its own geopolitical interests in the region, thus some agreement is still possible. Over the past 13 years, nearly 45,000 children from Kazakhstan were adopted, 21% of them by foreign citizens. After the recent re-registration, 20 international adoption agencies were left in Kazakhstan, including major organizations from Spain, Canada, and the U.S. Organizations working with children's rights believe the reputation of the Dima Yakovlev law is possible, and even if proposed, it will never be supported by the NGOs. In general, I see no factors that can stop or ban the adoption of children who could be brought up in a real family environment. The only thing that concerns me is the necessity for tried mechanisms of transfer, control, and monitoring these children.
The hearing over the murder of Interior Ministry ex-officer, activist of Patriots Party Dauren Azimbayev was held in Almaty on Thursday. He was shot by a police sergeant Murat Abirov. The defendant is accused of power abuse. The details of the case in the next report.
On Thursday, Judge Khakirov was hearing the key case witness, the defendant police officer's partner, Captain Sanat Musakeyev, who allegedly lost consciousness after being hit in the face by Dauren Azimbayev, thus failing to witness the actual moment of murder. The judge found the testimony to be rather doubtful, as the attester was unable to specify the circumstances allowing police officers to resort to service gun usage. So you claim the defendant was right shooting the victim? That man assailed him with a knife. Did you witness the act of assault? No, I was unconscious. Having achieved nothing from the testimony, the judge had to adjourn the trial session for a later date. However, the dispute between the defendant Murat Abirov's relatives and the victim's family lawyers continued outside the courtroom. Every little thing counts in court. It is my son's fate we're talking about. I will not stay silent. I have given the interview to the national TV channel. Meanwhile, the widow of Dauren Azimbayev resented her husband's public image. They planted the knife on my husband, and the very next morning after he was murdered, the media declared him an assailant. According to the victim's lawyer, the parties could have reached an amicable settlement if the defense had not been trying to lay the blame on the murdered athlete. The defendant's mother keeps flooding all the available media sources with numerous interviews discrediting honor and the dignity of the deceased, Dauren Azimbayev. No wonder the victim's family could not ignore this kind of behavior. The next trial hearing on the notorious case is scheduled for January 31st. Meanwhile, the defendant police officer Murat Abirov faces a sentence of 5 to 10 years of imprisonment.
Repatriates who moved to the southern Kazakhstan claim that they are needed for demographic purposes only, as the native country has not provided adequate living conditions. Residents of Akhtas village live like on an island for several years already. Around 70 families of repatriates were moved to the new homes with no natural gas, electricity, water or even roads. People built their homes on the land provided by the administration, which promised to provide all the utilities but never did. Details in the next report.
We were promised an uninterrupted supply of water and electricity. Getting tired of waiting, we headed to the district administration with a bus full of children, but they did not let us in. Shafira moved in here in 2007, like many of her neighbors. At that time, she could not even imagine living for years in terrible conditions without even basic utilities. Every house in this village runs on an emergency stock of flashlights, candles and oil lamps. Children have to walk 7 kilometers of a country road in any weather conditions just to get to the school, and even further to the local clinic, since there is no public transportation here either. Children are forced to do their homework under the dim light of oil lamps and walk to the Akjar school the next day. It's like we're living in the 15th century under the same conditions as people in the Dark Ages. 6 years of lobbying local administration produced no results except for a pile of official replies and empty promises. Villagers complain that they see no changes coming, while the president's administration never even granted them a response note. We wrote a letter to Nazarbayev but did not receive any reply except for this mail receipt. They probably don't even consider us people. It is not clear why they've invited us here, maybe for compiling some demographic statistics. Representatives of the governor's office say they are aware of the issues, but it's not easy to solve them. We have prepared the expense budget. Laying the water pipe will cost us over $3 million, on top of $6 million more for the power line. The request to allocate the funds from the state budget was sent this year. Indeed, it looks like residents of Akhtas will have to wait for the promised utilities for a few more years.
This is all for now. Thank you for watching. Stay well.